Good morning, this is Dale with Sandpiper Pumps. Today we're going to show you how to install a wet end kit into an HDF2 unit. The HDF2 unit has a suction on the top, discharge on the bottom. A little bit different than a standard ball valve pump. This particular unit uses flat valves. At the same time, the techniques used on this particular unit will be similar to the HDF1 unit we have on display. This particular pump is a little bit smaller in design, still the same concept, important on torque procedures. The flat valve settings and other areas are very important in both units. The rebuild you are going to see is accurate in man, method, and machine. For video purposes, a lot of the work we are going to do will be condensed. If at any time you feel you need to stop to get caught up with what we were doing on the video, please feel free to do so. Identifying which kit is required for your repair has become easier on newer pumps with the permanently affixed metal serial number tag that now indicates the wet end and air end kit information for the pump. Kit information can also be found in the service and operating manual. Sandpiper genuine replacement parts, wet end and air end kits provide a bill of material for the components included in the kit. All items included in the kits are components that Sandpiper recommends replacing when rebuilding a pump. The pump we are using today is an example of the ease of kit installation. Always consult your respective service and operating manual before performing any maintenance on your pump. Service and operating manuals include composite repair parts drawings, repair parts list, and torque specifications. For service and operating manuals or more information, visit us on the web at sandpiperpump.com. Always remember that safety is the highest priority. When working on or around any equipment, always follow the correct safety procedures. Always read and follow the safety warnings and instructions in the service manual before any work is started on the pump. For more information, see the warmer-up video on safety at sandpiperpump.com. The pump we are going to use in this presentation is new and unused. We've actually just taken it off of our assembly line. A lot of the castings will come apart much easier and simpler than the pump you will be working on. The pump you have is probably come out of a system, has been used in an application, so your work will take extra time compared to what we will be spending on this particular unit. These are the tools being used for the HDF2, and while the sizes will change based on the 1-inch pump, the type will remain the same. 11/16 inch combination wrench, 5/8 inch combination wrench, 7/16 by 1/2 inch box end wrench, 12-inch pry bar, torque wrench, 18-inch flex handle breaker bar, 7/16 inch nut driver, dead blow hammer, 7/16 inch deep well socket, 1/2 inch deep well socket, 5/8 inch deep well socket, 1/2 inch socket, 5/8 inch socket, 11/16 inch socket, 3/8 inch hex bit socket, 3-inch extension, needle nose pliers. We're going to go ahead and get started disassembling our HDF2. For ease of disassembly purposes, we're actually going to use a battery-powered 3/8 drive impact gun. I know most of you out there probably have air impact guns, which would probably be a little easier, but for this purpose we're going to use a 3/8. So the first thing we're going to do is just loosen the cap screw on the suction manifold. Then we're going to come to the other side and remove this cap screw and go ahead and remove the 4 cap screws on the elbow. After removing the cap screws with a pry bar, separate the 2 components. With the elbow removed, we can set it aside. Now we can completely remove the other cap screw, remove the suction manifold, slightly pry it apart for easier removal. Loosen the cap screw from the discharge manifold to the discharge elbow. Go to the opposite side, remove the other cap screw and the 4 cap screws on the discharge elbow. Slightly pry the two components apart. Once the elbow is removed, we can go to the opposite side, remove the cap screw to remove the discharge manifold. Repeat the previous process for the opposite side. Now we're going to remove the discharge flat valve assembly. With a pry bar, just pry the assembly off of the two studs. Remove the discharge seat. We are now ready to remove the outer chamber on one side. We're going to remove the two bottom cap screws and the two top cap screws first. We will remove the 4 through bolts that hold the leg brackets on. We can now remove the outer chamber. With the outer chamber removed, we will now remove one diaphragm assembly. This assembly may be tight. The assembly removed, remove the diaphragm bumper. We are ready to go to the opposite side to remove the opposite chamber. Remove the 2 top and 2 bottommost cap screws first, and then the 4 cap screws that hold the leg brackets on. We are ready to pull the diaphragm rod assembly from the intermediate section. Once this is completed, we are ready to disassemble our diaphragm assemblies. We are going to use soft jaws in our vise to hold the diaphragm rod so we don't damage any of the components. Install the diaphragm rod into the soft jaw, clamping it down. This makes it much easier to remove the diaphragm assembly from the shaft. Spin the assembly from the shaft, remove the bumper, visually inspect the diaphragm rod for any scratches, grooves, or wear. Make sure the diaphragm rod is in very good condition prior to reuse. Remove our soft jaws from our vise. We are now ready to disassemble the diaphragm assemblies to install the new diaphragms. Clamp the inner diaphragm plate into the vise. Remove the hex head socket, and this should separate the inner plate from the outer plate. Once the two plates are separated, both plates should be inspected for wear. Make sure the edges of the diaphragm plates are nice and round, as not to cut into new components. Do the same thing with the opposite diaphragm. Clamp the inner plate, remove the hex head socket, and we have our outer diaphragm plate, diaphragm, and inner plate disassembled. Visually inspect the inner plate for round edges, not to have any sharp corners. We are now ready to remove our wet end kit from our package, prepare everything for installation. Make sure the radius of the inner diaphragm plate is pointing up towards the diaphragm. Install that into the vise. Lay the diaphragm assembly wear pad on top of the inner diaphragm plate. Now we're ready to install the outer diaphragm plate. Also inspect the outer radius for any sharp edges or any wear. You can slide the wear pad on, slide the diaphragm over top of the hex head cap screw, flip it over and thread it into the inner plate. It may be a little easier just to invert the diaphragm, help you install the hex head cap screw a little easier. Torque the diaphragm assembly to recommended manufacturing torque specifications. Remove it from the vise and repeat the previous process for the opposite side. Once the assemblies are together, we are now ready to install the status seal. Once the status seal is slid over the diaphragm stud, we can thread the diaphragm rod onto one assembly. Once the diaphragm assemblies are complete, we can set them aside and ready our flap valves, our elbows and chambers to install our new flap valves. Remove the stop nuts, hinge pads, wear pads, and the flap valves. Remove the seats, visually inspect them. The offset on the flap valve goes down towards the seat. Install the flap, the hinge pad, the retainer, and the elastomeric stop nuts. Tighten them down evenly from side to side. Once they are snug into place, work the flap valve open and close several times, checking for a gap. Make sure the flap is on correctly, the offset is on the right side, checking for an air gap between the flap and the seat. Tighten accordingly until the gap is closed up. Do not over tighten. If over tighten, the flap may hang open and prevent priming. If flap valve is too tight, back off on the stop nuts until flap seats properly. Hinge open and shut a couple times to make sure the flap does not hang open. This needs to be done on the elbows as well as the outer chambers. Remove the stop nuts, retainers, hinge pads, flap valves. Remove the seat, visually inspect for any damage. There is a left and a right side to the flap valve seat. Make sure they install the correct way. Install the seat. The offset of the flap valve goes down towards the seat. The arch of the hinge pad should go towards the pad. The retainer and the elastomeric stop nuts. Hand tighten until flap valve seals properly. We are ready to assemble our diaphragm assemblies. Our serial number plate always is in the upright direction. We're going to lubricate the main shaft, light coat of grease on the main diaphragm shaft. We have already installed our diaphragm bumper. Slide the assembly into the intermediate housing. We are now ready to install one of the outer chambers. Make sure that the top of the chamber is aligned with the serial number plate. Line the holes in the diaphragm with the inner chamber. We are going to install the upper two and the lower two cap screws first that go into the blind holes of the outer chamber. These are the most difficult to line up, so these are the ones you want to install first. Get these 4 cap screws started, get them up through the diaphragm, start them into the casting. Once they are started, you can run them down, slightly snug them into place, Now we can install our through bolts with our leg brackets. Once the leg brackets are in place, we can go ahead and tighten all 8 cap screws using a cross pattern. Once the chamber is in place, flip the assembly over, install our second bumper and status seal. With the diaphragm bumper into place, invert the diaphragm assembly, spin onto the shaft, and torque to manufacturer's specifications. When aligning the diaphragm bolt holes, always tighten to the next bolt hole, never loosen. Once we've started the diaphragm, we install a pry bar underneath the inner plate. Make sure you get the pry bar far enough in to catch the inner plate, not the diaphragm. Invert the diaphragm assembly. Now we can do a final torquing to the diaphragm assembly to the shaft. Make sure the bolt holes in the diaphragm line up with the inner chamber. We are ready to install the second outer diaphragm chamber, making sure the flat valves hang in the lower position. Install the 2 uppermost cap screws that go into the blind hole, as well as the 2 lowermost cap screws that go into the blind hole in the castings, and then the 2 leg brackets with the through bolts is the last 4 cap screws to install. Once they're all installed, tighten all the hardware in a cross pattern. We are now ready to install our discharge elbow. With our flaps all adjusted, install the 4 cap screws in the discharge flange. Now we're going to install the rubber seals on our manifold. Just stretch them over the casting, push them into place. Lightly grease the seal so it slides into the discharge elbow. Make sure you line the bolt holes up with each other. Just start the cap screw, just get it into place. You don't want to tighten this down yet. We are now ready to install the opposite elbow. Work it onto the seal, install the 4 cap screws. Make sure nothing's in a bind, just get the cap screws started. Now we want to install the suction side. We're going to install the suction elbow. Install the 4 cap screws, just leave them loose. Install our other 2 seals on the suction manifold. There's no up, no down. They can go on either way. Lightly grease the seal for easier installation. Slide the manifold into place and start the cap screw to hold it into its location. Now we're going to install our opposite suction elbow and cap screw. Once everything is in place, we now want to use a cross pattern and tighten all suction and discharge elbows using a cross pattern. Once all cap screws are tightened, our assembly is completed. If doing a complete rebuild, refer to our air end kit installation video. This concludes the wet end kit rebuild of the HDF2. The items we replaced were diaphragms, flat valves, hinge pads, sealing rings, and also installed wear pads onto the diaphragms. While the pumps are different in size and flow, the techniques used between the HDF2 and the HDF1 are very similar, torquing of the diaphragms and setting of the flat valves. For more information on this rebuild, you can visit us on our website at sandpiperpumps.com or contact us, the After Sales Support Department at service.warrenrupp@idexcorp.com. Thank you.